Worrisome news are reaching us from both US and Russian sources. It seems as if, though, the United States is taking active preparations for a war with Iran, or a Israeli-Iranian war, but let's not kid ourselves. Israel cannot fight a war with Iran on its own. It is dependent utterly and completely on the US military for support and intelligence, even more so than Ukraine is or has been. What we are learning from RT and from the New York Times and all over the news scene at the moment is that it seems the United States is evacuating non-essential personnel from its military bases in the Middle East, especially from its relatively large bases in Iraq. This is from Russia Today, and they are citing also the statements from the State Department. So does the New York Times, that although the New York Times frames it in a more direct way, saying that Israel appears ready to attack Iran, officials in US and Europe say concern about a strike and the prospect of retaliation led the United States to withdraw diplomats from Iraq and authorize the voluntary departure of US military family members from the Middle East. And we know the United States has a large footprint, of course, in all of West Asia, and Iran has already threatened to retaliate against those forces should US-backed Israeli strikes at its territory occur. And we know that Israel has been pushing for an escalation with Iran for the longest time. One of the things that held this back is the ongoing negotiations that are now in their third months between the Trump administration and Iran. And while Trump has been saying for the longest time that he believes that a deal is imminent, he recently in an interview actually said the opposite. He says there might be no nuclear deal, that he's accusing Iran of slow walking the discussions and negotiations, although it must be pointed out that the most unacceptable negotiation tactics come from the United States, and the United States has been changing its negotiation position constantly, where at the beginning it was pretty clear that the United States would have to accept that there will be nuclear enrichment of fuel, of plutonium or uranium in Iran, and this was then later walked back by the US negotiators, and the Trump administration told Steve Witkoff to demand that Iran cease all enrichment of its nuclear fuel. And this is, of course, a position that is utterly unacceptable to the Iranians. And now the United States is accusing Iran of having itself an unacceptable position. And although under international law, the use of force and the threat of use of force are forbidden, those are breaches of the UN Charter, we all know that the United States and Israel are constantly, and at all times threatening countries that they do not agree with direct military interventions. And so it seems at the moment also that the preparations for this are now underway, or the preparations for the fallout of a direct attack if Israel, with the help of the United States and the intelligence of the US, should try to target the nuclear sites of Iran, in which case Iran will strike back. Another very worrisome indication is that apparently recently the Donald Trump was asked about this on Wednesday evening, so that's only a couple of hours ago. He was asked about the reasons for the departure of U.S. personnel. Mr. Trump responded to reporters, "Well, you are going to have to figure that one out yourself." This is very worrisome again. This might be another negotiation tactic in order to scare Iran, but Iran has repeatedly refused to be bullied or scared into some kind of submission. There are its absolute red lines when it comes to the nuclear program and the peaceful use of the nuclear energy, which Iran insists it has and which it will not walk back from. And there's of course also been the entire strategy of the United States to link the nuclear issue to the missile program, which is to the Iranians utterly untouchable. And if these are now indeed preparations for strikes against Iran, and then something very very bad is around the corner. And I must say, the reason why I do not think this is exaggeration is that right now is actually, from an Israeli point of view, not only the right moment for this, but it is it's a necessary moment, because in Europe at the moment the mood is shifting. I cannot emphasize this enough. The recent success of the Madeleine, of the 12 activists who sailed who were trying to sail to Palestine, to Gaza, and deliver baby formula, and that was then intercepted on international waters, and these 12 people were kidnapped and were brought to Israel, and some of them, 8 of them, are still in Israel, while Greta Thunberg returned and was really successful, extremely successful at beating up the PR drums against the genocide in Gaza. This was a major fiasco for Israel, the way it was handled, and the way that it really managed to again bring into focus the inhumane and the total genocidal approach of Israel toward the civilians in Gaza, and its extermination attempts, its attempts at completely emptying the Gaza Strip and killing as many Palestinians as it can, even at these stations where Israel pretends to be providing food, but then ends up shooting scores of Palestinians at sight. All of this is happening and is galvanizing at the moment European publics mainly. And, there were large protests. French cities erupted recently in protests yesterday, the day before yesterday. And really, if you look on Twitter, you'll see the crowds. They're huge now. Those are tens of thousands or even in the hundreds of thousands of people who are protesting all over Europe. And the European governments have started to change their tune. Also, it must be pointed out, the media is changing its tune. There is currently much more of a much more critical tone going on, and the staunch Israeli supporters, even Piers Morgan is now talking about the atrocities Israel is committing. So the narrative control of Israel over what it has been, over the genocide that it has been overseeing for the last 3 years, is now slipping away. And Israel, if it knows one thing, it is that it needs international support in order to carry out its atrocities. That always was the case. There would not even be an Israeli state if it wasn't for international support for that. So that this, by international support, we mainly mean Western, European and North American support. You need the support of the people with the guns. The majority of the guns, to some of the weaponry, in some estimates it has been up to over 90%, has been delivered by only 2 countries, the United States and Germany. Without the delivering of these kind of weapon systems, Israel would be utterly incapable of wreaking the death and destruction that it is currently doing in Gaza, and it would be unable to work on its project of a larger Israeli state and of the annexation of the West Bank that it currently is greenlit, and the continuous extermination of the Palestinians on these lands. This is utterly clear, and it is becoming clearer by the day. And the fact that the European governments and the media are now maybe not about to fall, but that they are way less supportive of Israel, and that first European governments, Spain and Ireland, also started talking about Israel committing a genocide, all of this this wave that is now cracking down, this must be highly worrisome. And the one thing that can turn the boat around is if Israel can get back to its favorite role in this 80-year-old soap opera, which is the victim. It needs to be the victim again. And the way that Israel turns itself into a victim is by bullying everybody else and by, of course, firing first. So if Israel now attacks Iran, especially if it attacks Iran in a very sensitive area, and there's two of them, one is, of course, the nuclear facilities. The other one would be strikes on civilian infrastructure in a very very populated areas. Let's say a strike on Tehran, or a so-called decapitation strike at let's say the residence or parliamentary buildings in which Iran's leadership sits. If something like this happened, and Iran would go all out against Israel. That's absolutely clear, especially also if it is clear that this was done with the help of U.S. Support, military and intelligence support. Now, if then Iran strikes back, then Israel will again cry crocodile tears, and it will claim that Iran is trying to exterminate the Jews, and that this is tantamount to another genocide, and it will demand support, unconditional support for the defense of Israel, even if Israel is the one that shoots the first shots, even if Israel is the one that kills even hundreds, even thousands of Iranians. If the Iranians reply to that, Israel will call it an unprovoked genocidal aggression against Israel. This is absolutely and utterly clear. So in this sense, I am very worried now, because Israel is standing with its back to a wall at the moment, and Netanyahu is standing with the back to the wall, and he has shown time and again, and Israel has shown time and again, that whenever things go bad for Israel, they tend to escalate into a different realm in order to distract from the abysmal situation that they themselves have created. So in order to deflect now all of the media attention away from the still ongoing genocide, and deflect away from the political criticism from Europe, going to strike Iran and really provoking the war that they wanted the whole time, not provoking, starting the war that they wanted the entire time, is to me something that looks very convenient. Also, if we now look at the way that the international media, especially the New York Times, is building up to this, the narrative that's being constructed right now is that Israel is about to attack Iran, and the United States might then get sucked into it, right, unwillingly, and that the United States is still negotiating, and the United States is this reluctant player in this entire game, and that to me seems like a very convenient narrative to build up in order then to explain to the U.S. public that once Iran strikes back and also strikes at U.S. sites, that these strikes at U.S. military outposts, and the deaths of military personnel is utterly unprovoked, and that it is outrageous, and that now the United States is dragged into the war against its own will, right? It's very important always that for the psyche of the general public in the US, that all wars that it fights must be portrayed as wars of self-protection, right? So building up the narrative that, Israel might be doing something weird, but then the reaction of Iran is utterly outrageous. That is a direct attack at the United States, and now we need to fire back together with Israel. That kind of narrative is, of course, is now, in my view, already being prepared, which is why I find this news very disturbing. The United States doesn't have a track record of withdrawing military personnel for reasons other than being kicked out of a place like Afghanistan, or preparing for war. That was also the case with the Iraq War. Right before the Iraq War started, the U.S. Began to withdraw personnel that it had stationed there and in other places in the so-called Green Zone in Baghdad. So withdrawals, troop withdrawals, and diplomatic withdrawals are usually a sign that some form of political decision has already been made, and now the preparations are undergoing. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that this is not the case, because a U.S.-Israeli war with Iran would be utterly devastating. Also because Iran, of course, has now a security agreement with Russia. That doesn't mean Russia would automatically get involved. But I guarantee you, the way that the United States is enjoying pretending not to be a party to the conflict in Ukraine and being on the sidelines, in the same way Russia would tell everybody that it is not part of the conflict, while of course it would support Tehran with all the systems that it can somehow spare, because paying that it would simply be a payback. And this is the sad logic of international proxy warfare. If Israel actually managed to convince Trump to go to this length and to start a war, then it will not be a short one. Iran has managed to de-escalate situations, provocations, very, very heavy provocations over the last 2 or 3 years, several times. But a strike against its nuclear facilities, or a decapitation strike, or a strike against population centers would be something that would trigger an all-out war. So let's hope that's not the case. And in the meantime, we have to keep watching what's coming our way through the medias. Thank you very much for your attention.